Engines at the ready. The world's largest auto show, the Beijing Auto Show, is in full swing, and visitors can't get enough of the brand new tech on display. With over 180 vehicles making their global debut, including flying and even dancing cars, everyone from journalists to influencers, business titans and consumers are packing the exhibition halls to see what the future of auto travel looks like. International giants are in attendance, along with some of the most innovative and market-shaking Chinese EV makers. But what has got everybody talking? Are Chinese car makers redefining the international automotive landscape? And what does this mean for you? Welcome to this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Shanghai by Ethan Robertson from the US, co-founder of Wheelsboy, a YouTube channel specializing in Chinese cars. Also from Shanghai, Zheng, senior partner and head of automotive practice Asia at Roland Berger, a global strategy consultancy, and here in the Beijing studio, Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. First, let's focus on the show itself, and I want to go to Ethan. You have 250,000 subscribers on your channel, and you have been attending the Beijing Auto Show since 2020. Now, actually, we did a bit of a discovery, and Reuters actually did a story about you this week titled "American YouTuber Guides Foreigners Around Chinese Cars US Buyers Can't Get." So what makes you keep coming back, first of all, and what are you discovering this time?
So obviously the Beijing Auto Show, and I would argue that every major annual auto show, whether it's Beijing or Shanghai on odd years, is simply the most important auto show in the world at this point. I think you can tell that because it's not only home to debuts from Chinese makers such as BYD and Geely Group, but also international brands such as BMW, Mercedes, Ford, General Motors, Toyota. They are using it as a platform at this point to debut global models that normally would have been debuted previously at European or American auto shows. But now we're seeing them use Chinese auto shows like Beijing to debut them, because I think they also acknowledge the fact that these are the most important auto shows in the world. And they also acknowledge through these debuts that China is their most important market in the world.
What have you discovered? What's your biggest takeaway this year?
So my largest takeaway this year, frankly, was starting with the size. The biggest takeaway is just how big it was. It was the largest show so far. The number of debuts was the largest, the number of cars in attendance, the number of brands in attendance. So I was absolutely blown away, as I always am, by the sheer size and frankly also by the diversity of the debuts. I think what's been interesting about seeing the Chinese auto market develop is how these cars have gone from maybe just competing in one segment to now the entire breadth of segments, from small sedans all the way up to the largest SUVs.
Let me turn to Rong in Shanghai. You have been in automotive industry for 20 years. What is your biggest takeaway this year, and what does that reflect as the latest trend in China's auto industry?
Yes, I think one of the key takeaway from my side is that, first of all, indeed, you see very aggressive Chinese brands that are demonstrating their latest technology. And of course, considering a lot of local Chinese consumers' needs, and of course, they're putting in a full lineup of different functionalities. On the other side, I do observe that for the joint venture brands, we're talking about Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes. There is a very clear determination from those international giants that they are very determined or committed to this Chinese market. And that's why they are doing a lot of localizations. That means local technology and, of course, a lot of local caterings. And we do see that a lot of upstream functionalities, for example, the research and development, are now being more and more localized and authorized. And of course, I think in terms of the one of the key observation of the trend is, of course, also on the AI sort of like combination in the automotive. You do see a lot of emphasis on the smart cockpit concept, and also a lot of push of the standard equipment of the autonomous driving. And I think these are sort of like the key changes if we compare to the auto show 3-5 years ago.
As I mentioned, over 180 world premieres, and on top of that, there are some 70 concept cars unveiled during this year's auto show. Obviously, many foreign car makers are using this as a platform to unveil their latest products. Professor Liu, what does it mean for foreign car makers to be here in Beijing this time?
Well, in the first place, it's really the Chinese rising market for the automakers because every year we notice there is nearly 10 million cars that being sold, more concentrated in the e-car brands. And then the Chinese markets can really boast around 500 billion US dollars. So this is really the most attractive points. The other is that the foreign brands do need to join the race with the Chinese competitors here in China, on one hand to hold the Chinese market with a competitive share. The other is that to join the Chinese platforms like the auto shows, like the Chinese, car making ecosystem, so that they can really source locally and also face both the Chinese market and also the global marketplace. Now, I think it is instead of only looking for the hardware, they are also looking for the software upgradation, because the technology is there much lies in the software innovation. So the Chinese, the iteration gap is about 1 year to 1.5 years, but globally, the traditional cars has iteration cycle, around 5 years. So this is something that they need to catch up with China in global competitiveness, but also to work more in cooperation with many of the Chinese suppliers, from the rims to the OTA and also to the cockpits, etc. So this is really something that's a system that is joined on a global basis, but China both as a hub and also as a springboard to the global marketplace.
Ethan, one of the things you continuously highlight in your videos is the cost versus quality. Some luxury models are only priced around $30 US. You mentioned that in the US you can barely get an entry-level EV or hybrid for this price. So what's the message you want to share with your viewers through what you do here?
So the word that I continually come back to when it comes to Chinese cars is value. I think some people abroad think of them simply as cheap, but I don't think that's accurate. The prices are low, but what matters is what you're getting for that price is actually quite a bit. So as you mentioned, for 30,000 US dollars these days in China, you can, for example, get a large 6-seat SUV with some levels of technology that you would normally only see in more expensive, much more expensive luxury cars in markets like the US and in Europe. So I think that the value is just very impressive from the Chinese automotive companies right now. So that's something that's always really struck me.
What are the responses? What are the reactions from viewers in the United States watching your video, Ethan?
So the reactions in my comment sections are most commonly things like, why is it that I can't buy this car in my country? Or now I understand why they won't let this car come into the US market. It's actually because it would take a lot of market share from American automakers. So I do think that many people in my audience recognize the fact that these cars are a serious challenger to the existing kind of landscape of the US market. But they still, considering the strength of the product, would like to see them available for them to buy.
Understandably. We'll probably get back to that in just a moment. Let me go to Rong, however, to help us understand exactly what's behind the kind of value that Chinese-made new energy vehicles represent. Rong, how has China been able to achieve such competitiveness in such a short period of time? What's the secret?
Yep, sure. I think one of the key topic now in the global automotive world is China cost and also China speed. I think as Professor Liu just now mentioned that, on one side, the overall product development cycle has been shortened a lot by the Chinese players. And that is causing a lot of, I would say, on one side, a lot of advantage. On the other side, a much faster iteration in terms of product development. But I think it's a very good question that, how do the Chinese players manage to do so? I think first of all is that, in China, along all those big automotive manufacturing hubs, you have a very sophisticated and mature supply chain base. Without those supply chain base, of course, those fast speed cannot be achieved. So I think this is one of the big advantage, because basically in China you can find all the components, and also with a very strong support even on the R&D side from the suppliers to work together with the OEM. I think that is the biggest advantage. And of course, on the other side, indeed, the Chinese market is the single largest market in the world. And in the past, it's always enjoying a very fast growth. But now it is coming to a relatively more modest growth, or let's say a low single-digit growth market. And with those market environment, it pushes a lot of players, to make sure that they need to grab the market share. And on certain perspective, I think those value for money concept is also one of the key levers the Chinese players are adopting to make sure that they get the right size of the market share, and later on they do optimize the profitability level, which is of course also very critical to business.
Professor Liu, as a result of the rapid upgrading of the ecosystem, Chinese exports of Chinese NEVs have been rising extremely fast. Actually, the very latest figure shows that exports of Chinese-made NEVs, including Tesla's made in China, have gone up by 100%, but the export of Chinese brand NEVs have gone up even faster, 140% year on year. What is fueling such growth?
Well, I think one is it's market driven, because right now with the global energy crisis, particularly in Europe, and they are eager to seek the auto cars, based on the new energy. And this is also in conformity with the global commitment to the carbon neutrality and carbon peaking standards. And second is that if we see the Chinese auto industry, many of those foreign brands, both from United States and EU, are really in China for years. So therefore, they have been working in competition and also in cooperation with the Chinese ecosystem, so that they also turn out to be a driver among the Chinese and with the Chinese e-vehicles to boost the export drive. And then also that the Chinese, the government has been operating its both industrial policy and open door policy to support such sort of drive. And of course, there's a very tense competition, but in the meanwhile, we see this is really a trendsetter. As I've been traveling in Mexico City for the last 1 week, I noticed that these countries are really paving the way, and particularly in infrastructure-wise, in terms of charging posts, in terms of the driving standards, etc., for the e-cars. So this is very much is there to be in alignment with the global expectation and government direction, and also more importantly, it's really consumer preference that's there to drive the Chinese, the aggressive export.
Ethan, having attended the Beijing Auto Show for a couple of years, how do you see the trend going forward? Will the Chinese innovation and value creation continue to pick up pace? If so, what does that mean for American manufacturers, American workers, American consumers?
So I definitely don't see the Chinese automotive industry slowing down anytime soon. As Ron has pointed out, we are seeing slowing growth. So we're no longer seeing the explosive levels of growth, or the growth is obviously faster than most other markets, especially mature markets like the United States. So I think that as long as there are as many brands as we have right now in China, which of course is more than any other country, you're going to continue to see the intense levels of competition. And intense levels of competition are what creates the level of innovation that we are seeing. So in terms of what that means for the United States, for example, I know that my own companies from my own country, the United States, they are struggling at the moment in the Chinese market to produce the kind of products that Chinese consumers are looking for, specifically in this NEV space, these EREVs and plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles. So I do hope, perhaps this is a streak of patriotism that I have, I do hope that they're able to, maybe even through cooperation with their Chinese partners, create competitive products that will allow them to stop the downward slide in terms of sales. But I think only time will tell. And so I think if you extend these kind of effects to what would happen if these Chinese brands reached the US market, well, it just doesn't really look very good for them, that's for sure.
Ron, how do you look at the trend going forward and the impact on the world, on the wider world? Will the trend pick up even further? And if honestly, if I would be a foreign car maker, especially a legacy car maker, I would be concerned, right? Because the competitiveness of Chinese-made cars are just so strong. Some people have been lobbying, understandably, for some sort of protection so that their workers will not lose their jobs, their factories will not be closing down, and hence, actually, we have been seeing the 100% tariffs that the United States has imposed on Chinese-made NEVs. How legitimate are these concerns, and are there any way such concerns can be addressed and alleviated?
Yes, sure. I think one of the key theme of the Chinese players, I mean, be it the private-owned OEMs or let's say more state-owned background OEMs, I think the key theme in the coming years will be become a global, let's say, a global brand. That is including, with a lot of even local productions in the overseas market, and of course, with the past 3, 5, 10 years of experience, I think the leading Chinese OEM has learned their lessons by what is the right formula or what are the success factors to become, a true global company. I think first thing first is that they have realized it's very, very important to be very well integrated with the local culture, with the local supply chain, and make sure that, they are contributing positively also to the local economy. And second of all, I think when those Chinese companies, they go abroad, one of the key advantages is that, they do have a scale of volume that are supporting their cost depreciation, because for the Chinese OEMs, now they have two markets to leverage, the local market and also the global market. And I do mention that, China is the world's single largest market. And on that front, I think the cost depreciation and even on some of the amortization side, I mean, they do have a cost advantage. And I would say it is also rightfully to expect that there will be a lot of local regulations to protect the local market, which is also understandable. But I think from that perspective, it creates, the new challenge for the Chinese players to really understand what are the local requirements from the multiple perspective, and then as I mentioned, integrate into the local environment. Well, I mean, if you ask me, I think in the long run, Chinese origined brands will be, I would say, a superstar in the global automotive world. And I think that is a big shake towards the legacy players, and the market landscape will change.
I notice, let me add a little. I notice there are different concerns if you compare the United States versus the European Union. United States, in addition to the job consideration with the competition, they are more concerned with the strategic security. So they view the Chinese aggressive exports is really quite much of a challenge to their national security, by those politicians. And with Europe, it's really the competitive pressure that is there to have this concern, although they conceptually welcome the environmentally friendly any type of vehicles that's there to help the address to the climate change issues. But with different concerns, and China would really work out different strategies to address these type of concerns. So eventually, it is really the market, it's really the consumer choices that are there exerting more of the political pressure over those decision makers as how they can really best have their livelihood and also the best value out of any product. So therefore, I think it's hopeful despite of the existing political challenges.
Ethan, what is the number one concern among your viewers, for instance? What is the biggest question that they ask when it comes to Chinese cars? And also your take on how there's going to be a live and let live situation, right, in terms of the auto industry?
So I would say that the concerns around Chinese cars that are expressed by my audience has evolved over the 6 or so years that I've been doing this. The comments section used to be full of people who simply stated that, they thought that Chinese cars' quality was inferior to those of other manufacturers. They based that on their impression from earlier generations of Chinese electronics products, for example. However, I think that there's an increasing acceptance that Chinese cars in terms of quality are as good or better than those of other manufacturers. And so I think that they're facing more of similar pushback to other EV brands in general. So for example, you'll note the response from my audience. There's people that want to tell you that the EV, don't drive that, it's going to catch on fire, it'll burn down your house. Well, I think those of us who know the EV industry know that that's not the case, that the risk of fire with EVs is nowhere near as great as people like to talk about it online. So I think that that's been kind of the biggest thing for them, biggest change we've seen there.
And Rong, has there been successful practices in terms of collaboration between Chinese automakers and foreign automakers so that the opportunities, the technologies can be shared, that the opportunities for auto industry around the world can be also harnessed together?
Yes. I think that is also one of the trend we are seeing. So, for example, I think Volkswagen has been in close collaboration with one of the Chinese brand, XPeng, in terms of R&D, in terms of platform, and also quite a bit on the different, test pilot on the certain new technologies. That's quite clear, and I think it is a good example in terms of how Chinese and foreign OEMs could work together, like you put it, harness the overall development. And also there are other, let's say, examples like Stellantis and also Leapmotor. They are more approaching, the concept of working together by splitting their roles. For example, Stellantis helps Leapmotor to take care a bit more of the global market expansion, where Leapmotor focuses really a lot on the domestic market development. So I think this is going to be also a trend that the OEM players are going to leverage each other's advantage. I think in the next 2, 3, 5 years as a mainstream.
As we come to the end of the show, I really want to recall what I experienced when I was posted to Geneva as an overseas correspondent. I covered the Geneva Auto Shows back in 2012, 2013, and it was a completely different picture. There was only one Chinese car, one Chinese brand on display amongst, all the big international names, and it was almost a bit humiliating. And now, 10, 15 years later, you look at what's happening in Beijing, and I guess in Geneva, in other international auto shows, the pictures are very much different. So, Professor Liu, really going going forward, what's going to happen? There are different attitudes, towards the newcomer that is China. In the United States, probably more resistance, protection. Let's, stop things from flooding over. With the Europeans, it's also slightly different, right? They are trying to negotiate with a minimum price for Chinese-made NEVs so that the shock and the impact can be mitigated. What do you think of these approach? And in the end, what would be an ideal picture that everybody can live and live better, together?
Well, first of all, as a Chinese citizen and also as a global citizen, I feel very proud that the Chinese, the e-cars are really there to penetrate on a global basis and winning more of the respect in terms of their brand and their service and also their integrated operation. And they are also the big part of the global supply chain in this particular industry, leading to the future lifestyle. So, competition is necessary for any type of industry to move forward, particularly in the technological iteration. And so this is really a healthy competition. But of course, those who are really laggards will be shaken out. This is a very natural way. And this is something that we have been taught by the Western companies operating in China. And now, the ideal situation is that, live and let live and also let each other live in a better life. And this is doable because differentiation strategy and collaboration strategy can really peacefully coexist and also trying to boost each other in the race of innovation and also in the competition of service. Eventually, the global consumers will really benefit from this outcome. Of course, regulators will also have to innovate in order to accommodate the advancement of technology, particularly in the future when we look at the driverless operation for those e-cars. And this is something that that can be harnessed on global basis in the new rule setting.
Co-development, reimagined. Finally, Ethan, very briefly, what has coming to China all of these years done to you as a person, as an influencer?
Well, first of all, I think that my career as an influencer would not have been possible had I not come to China, and especially come to China when I did. All the opportunities that have been presented to me as a reviewer of cars are due to the fact that I came at the exact right time, at the exact time when the Chinese automotive industry was skyrocketing. It's because of that I've been able to grow the audience that I have, both domestically, because I also produce content in Chinese, and then also internationally. And it's the reason that I can do things like invite 15 foreigners from all over the world to join me in China for our EV tour to enjoy Chinese cars. So it's been very special.
All right, I wish you all the very best. We have to leave it there. Many thanks to my guest, Roland Zheng, Senior Partner and Head of Automotive Practice Asia at Roland Berger, Ethan Robertson, co-founder of Wheelsboy, and Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Baocheng, coming to you from Beijing as usual. You can follow me on Facebook, X, and YouTube using the handle Liu Baocheng in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.